This week, we welcome Jess Burn, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, to discuss Forrester's top security program recommendations for 2022. In the Leadership and Communications section, what cybersecurity metrics should I report to my board? Cybersecurity litigation risks, 4 top concerns for CISOs. The SEC is about to force CISOs into America's boardrooms and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take 1/10 of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more. It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 260, recorded April 25th, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, in the Lone Star Studio. Yes, see, I got it. It's all here in Texas. Joining remotely are my co-hosts. First, welcome back from PTO, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey there, Matt. Thanks. Back from Washington, D.C. A little bit of excitement over the weekend, but all in all, great trip with the family.
Great to have you back. Also joining me from the great state of Texas is Mr. Ben Carr. Oh, he's muted.
Helps if I go off of mute. I said a little less remote than we used to be. Glad to be back with you here today in a nice rainy day in Austin.
Rainy and cool. Yes, it is. I don't wear the quarter zip often in Texas, but it's cool today. Security Weekly listeners save $100 off your RSA Conference 22 full conference pass. RSA Conference will be live in San Francisco June 6th to 9th, 2022. Security Weekly will be there in full force, delivering real-time live coverage and interviewing some of the top event speakers and sponsors. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2022 and use the code 52UCyber. Hope to see you there. Do you have any specific guests or topics that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and complete the form. We review those suggestions often and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Jess Burn is a senior analyst at Forrester, serving security and risk professionals. She contributes to Forrester's research on the role of the CISO and Zero Trust. Additionally, Jess covers email security, incident response and crisis management, and security training, education, and certifications. Prior to her analyst role, Jess spent 8 years as a principal advisor on Forrester Security and Risk Council. In this role, she was a trusted partner to a network of CISOs and security and risk leaders making critical decisions in the areas of risk management, data privacy and protection, cybersecurity operations, and identity and access management. Jess, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me today. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great. We love to bring the analysts on, especially when they have these great little reports that we can share tidbits and insights to the community and help them build a better security program. Before we get into some of the topics, Jess, give us kind of a little background on the foundations, kind of the thought process behind this initial report around these top security recommendations.
Yeah, great. So this is an annual report. We've been doing this, for at least 8 years or so. And so this, along with our predictions for every year, and then also our top threats reports, are things that we do as a team every year. So every year we sit down and do a brainstorming session about what we've heard from the hundreds and hundreds of conversations we've had with security leaders and security practitioners, as well as the security tech community over the course of a year, and sort of distill that into what we think that security leaders should be thinking about for the year to come. So that's really what we do for our program recommendations every year. And this year, we decided to really focus and theme out the spotlight that CISOs have right now. They've had it now. It's been gaining and getting brighter and brighter for the last couple of years. But there's a moment in time now where there's a lot of goodwill, I think. If you've made it through 2020, and good Lord, you made it through 2021 as well, you've got some access, you've got some influence, and you're able to make an impact on the organization by helping them go to market as a trusted business. So we're trying to basically say to folks, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious moment of spotlight? Use it for good. And we have these 8 recommendations for you.
And we talk a lot about aspects of all of these 8. And so I want to start with one that we talk about a lot, and that is about trust. Add trust to your role and title. Trust, we think, is a very important component of, I think, any security leadership role, especially for the CISO, right? How do you establish trust? How do you build trust with the organization and then use that to build and craft a great security program? Where does the role move? You say add it to the title. Jason will say this: if you don't report to the chief, if you don't talk about risk, you'll report to the chief risk officer, right? Same thing for trust. If you don't distill trust or get or build trust, does that mean you report to the chief trust officer? Is that where this role potentially goes?
To me, I think it's time that we get to the CEO, and I think we'll get there. Probably not in 2022, but when you're looking at going to market on trust and becoming part of a trusted business, this goes into product security. This goes into enterprise security, and this is really just providing the backbone for the business to move forward. So we were just sitting down with some CISOs last week, and many folks are already doing this, right? They're out there, they're listening to customers. They're trying to make sure that employee productivity isn't bogged down by a lot of friction. And so it's really about moving the business forward. And I think now that CISOs are in front of the board alone without the CIO, I think it's time for them to kind of formally come out of that shadow. And with adding trust to the title, our feeling is that it's time to go to the CEO level. Love to hear your thoughts, though.
And Jess, one of the things throughout the course of my career, I truly feel, and Matt hit on it, trust is the foundation of all the relationships that I've built. It's the foundation of influence with other business leaders. But ultimately, it was about listening and learning the business. So building that connection with business leaders across the entire organization, learning their business, learning what motivates them, learning what they envision their journey and their strategies to be, and really aligning to that. As you started having conversations with other CISOs and you really dug into add trust to the role, how did some CISOs kind of start down that path of building trust? Because trust isn't something that you flip a switch and make happen. It takes time.
No, absolutely. It's a very purposeful effort to go and meet with the business. And the reports we've put out before, we have a first 90 days as a CISO. And whether you've been in the role, you're new there for your first 90 days, or whether you've been there for 5 years, you need to get out and get in front of the business. you can reboot as if you're brand new and go start building those relationships and having those conversations, because change is made one conversation at a time between a successful CISO and business leaders. I've seen people also bring in BSO roles, right, to make sure that there's an ongoing, because the CISO is just one person, this ongoing relationship where you've got somebody there in the BU management team that's constantly thinking about security and how that applies to decisions being made at the business unit level. So it is a very purposeful thing that needs to be done, especially customers too, getting out in front of it. I've known a lot of CISOs that have made or broken deals based on what they've said to customers, and they've won over competitors just because of the ability for the CISO to demonstrate superior security in their products and services as well.
Yeah, Jess, I think that's so important. I mean, you're kind of echoing the playbook I'm trying to run, right? So my role has evolved. Like, I started off as the CISO with the company I'm with now, but very quickly we moved and evolved that title to Chief Security and Trust Officer, and working to bring on a BSO right now. Right, I really believe in that. Pushing security out into the business, making it kind of transparent and part of the normal function. I think that's really key. CISOs have to become business leaders to the organization and manage that risk. So I think you're right on target with that. I would be interested in how you see that role of the BSO evolving over time. Like, where do you see functionally that bringing the most value to the organization?
Yeah, I just published a role profile on a BSO recently. My colleague Jeff Pollard and I did, because I'm such a big believer in that role. And, I've seen it work really well for years in financial services and insurance, right? So I think about like a Mass Mutual where they've got a BSO embedded in the data science team, right? And the BSO acts as this, is constantly thinking about customer trust when they're thinking about how to use specific data, right? And I think that's really incredible. So you're acting as a way to enable the business, a role that enables the business, but you're also thinking about all the things that are the backbone of the trusted business: regulations, privacy, and just data use in general that keeps customer trust intact. So I think the BSO role is, one, it's a great feeder if you want to do succession planning for the CISO. CISO should be developing people that they think can ultimately replace them if they have a different exit strategy. And I think, they should be thought of as mini CISOs within those business units, but then with a reporting up and a lot of shared communication between the BSOs, so everybody has a really great picture about, how security is aligning with corporate objectives.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we were debating that role a few weeks ago on this show, actually. Jess had my original take too, Ben. I'm just saying.
I think it depends upon the size of the org, right? So I think she's right. Like, in a financial services organization or an organization that's large and has different business operating units, I think that does align more to that. But I think in smaller, mid-sized organizations, the way I've used it, and for your comment, Jess, is we've used it kind of to bring in people who are maybe outside of security but have a real connection to the business. So from a like sales engineer leader or something like that, to come in and kind of run and organize the security and privacy champions to develop those areas of the business, but then use that to give them experience and exposure into other areas of security where they can kind of then spread out and figure out where they evolve into.
Yeah, that's dead on, Ben. I mean, I did the same thing, right? Not, in an emerging enterprise organization where we really didn't have the budget to hire a bunch of security professionals. We went out there and evangelized the program and got what we called cyber warriors. And they were folks embedded in the business who had another role, but ended up aligning with security, and then little by little started getting that influence. And then, their focus starts to become cybersecurity for the organization and privacy and data protection, and really evolving it that way. So from within the departments themselves, getting folks who are interested in aligning and working with us.
Yeah, that's a great feeder, especially if you look at some really good developer security champions. I think those roles are huge because that's such a big part of oftentimes product security. And if you've got someone that understands how to speak both of those languages, you've got the makings of a great BSO and maybe a future CISO ahead of you. You never know.
Agreed.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm going to go to treat security staff for what it is, different, because I think it aligns a little bit to this building trust, right? I mean, you also have to build your team, trust is a big component of that, right? You have to, hire people that you trust. You want to instill that trust on them. And I think a lot of CISOs struggle with this. Building out the staff is difficult in this day and age. How, as a CISO, do you continue to staff up your teams and instill that same level of trust across the organization?
Yeah. So I'll start. So this is one where I think relationships count too. And in this case, it might be the relationship with HR. So when the pandemic was in full swing, I remember speaking to CISOs saying, I cannot seem to get HR to understand that I need to blow up our geographic requirements for these specific positions. I don't care. I'm looking for the top talent. And I think that's an important thing when people have decided to sort of up and move wherever it is that they feel most comfortable. That plays into it. And I think, people have been saying the great resignation, but in security, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, it's really just a great reshuffle because people have gone somewhere else. They haven't left the workforce. They just went somewhere else that was more in line with their values, and more in line with what it is that they're looking for from a career. And what we've seen oftentimes in places that have had a lot of attrition is that it's not so much the money, but it's the lack of a clear path forward within that organization. So I've been a big proponent of things like succession planning when you think about retention, because people need to know what's my next move and how can I start getting ready for that now? And how can you invest in me? And how can I see that you're investing in me in a development path for me to go from a SOC analyst to an incident responder, for example, or maybe from an incident responder all the way to a security operations manager, should that happen. So I think letting people know that they're valued and that there's a place for them moving forward in the organization is big. And then back to HR, you've kind of got to blow up some of those hiring practices, be it geography. It could be bachelor's degree requirements. It could be, making sure that you don't tune your software, your recruiting software so much that you're just filtering out absolutely everybody that doesn't have every cert in a book. There are things that need to be done to make sure that you're bringing in people in the pipeline at the entry level and then keeping those folks that you really want to keep around. So I'd love to hear what's happening, in practice in your organization.
No, that's absolutely music to my ears. I mean, number one, it's, diversify the workforce and pull those constraints that old school
That's
HR has put around security roles, right? And really diversify that pool that you can look at. One of my success stories is that I have an incredible security manager right now who started off as a business analyst, right? And just had the attitude, had the aptitude, wanted to learn, started at the entry level from a security perspective and really picked up steam. And now is an incredible, senior manager in a cybersecurity team. It's really looking outside the box and looking for that attitude and aptitude, building a bench, doing things like apprenticeship programs so you can build a bench. I think that's where we're going to be successful. Just break those chains of traditional HR hiring practices.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and add that I think I echo what you've said and what Jason said, but I think to highlight on a different point that you brought up, I think the transparency and the communication and giving people kind of a roadmap for their career, right? Echoing like what do they need to do? I mean, I've gone into a lot of organizations where the mantra that titles don't matter. There's a certain truism to that, but I think people want to see like, how do I get from step A to step B, right? How do I get to a career path? How do I get to a career goal? And I think, partnering with HR is a great idea. I think HR has been kind of this disconnected entity from many parts of the organization. I think, security leveraging that to do both training, awareness, making sure you're staying in touch with the vibe and the culture of the company and how to best articulate the message of security and make it part of everyone's job, but as well trying to figure out how to utilize HR to get benefits to the program. So how do you handle hiring? How do you make that connection from a relationship perspective so you can do things like say, hey, I don't care where somebody is, right? Hey, the numbers that we're showing for salaries for these roles aren't in line with what we're seeing from market. How do we get that quicker updated so we're not going off of something that was established 5 years ago and is no longer a truism? So I think that's a really good point, is to look for areas of the organization. And HR is a good example where you really need to partner to figure out how to excel in your program.
And it's not just cybersecurity, folks. It's everywhere. We struggle with this every single day on the media side of the house. Yes, we focus on cybersecurity, but I don't necessarily need a CISO or a full-blown cybersecurity executive in here either. And it's tough in any business, I think, to recruit and find the right talent. So I think these tips are important across the board. This next one, I love this next one. See government as a source of good in cybersecurity for once. And I think a lot of this has to do with zero trust, Jess, and the administration's move to push the agencies to zero trust. Now, we just finished zero trust research that I presented last month, and although it's a big topic in the federal government, we don't see the same adoption on the commercial side. So the commercial side's a little slower to this than an executive order from the federal government. But I do agree with you that the government has done some good here in laying out the components of a zero trust architecture that we in the industry can learn off of.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're telling people to do is use this, right? Use this to your advantage right now. And I've seen people do this, right? They're going up to the board, they're going to their peers in IT operations, they're going to CIOs and saying, look, this is an example of a mandate and this is going to happen. The government's taking this on. We can too. In fact, there was a Canadian, it's a Crown Energy company up in Canada that I spoke to recently that is actually using the US government's mandate to push their own zero trust efforts forward, because you're seeing this as an example of adoption. And I think what the private sector sometimes doesn't realize is that they're doing a good number of things that fall into the zero trust framework, be it NIST or be it Forrester's. They're already doing things like MFA and PAM, and they're doing microsegmentation, and they've got SOAR working, they've got security analytics happening. So it's really helping people understand that this is not a complete rip and replace, which I think is sometimes the fear for private sector. They're fearing that there's just going to be too much cost and too much change. There might be a fair amount of change, but I wouldn't say there's necessarily going to be a lot of heavy tech investment. It's really doing what you're already doing, but optimizing the processes around it. So that was the zero trust piece for it. There's a hiring aspect to this too, because as you know, the government blew up the salary bands for cybersecurity talent. That's going to mean that folks who would never have ever gone to a government agency before could leave you for them. So once again, all those things we just talked about come into play as well.
Yeah, I think the best thing for me that the zero trust architecture did was really help people identify the core pillars of the zero trust architecture. Because you're right. Organizations are doing a lot of the components. They're doing aspects of identity. They're doing stuff on the device side with their endpoints, network, applications, and the data side, right? But it's having laid out kind of a vision of, when we talk zero trust, these are the components of zero trust. Because the problem with zero trust in the early days, and I think we still have a little bit of this, is it zero trust on the network side or is zero trust only on the identity side? No. Zero trust has to cover all 5 of these core domains. So don't just think about zero trust in one of those pillars. You got to start thinking across the 5 pillars. And I think that was some of the best education that the industry could have received from the federal government.
Totally agree on that. Yeah. So we just published a definition of modern zero trust, where I will admit, as a long-term Forrester, this term came from us, right? My esteemed former colleague John Kindervag, but then it sort of ran away from us, and we have 20-page papers on aspects of zero trust, but not a succinct definition. So I would encourage folks to go and check that out. A blog post from my colleague David Holmes has the full definition in it in front of the paywall. And it is a framework. And to do zero trust, you must do all of it. And I think the tech industry, to their credit now, is understanding that their messaging should be, we enable this pillar of zero trust, not we are zero trust. And I think that's actually helping reduce the confusion as well, because everyone is saying, this is what we do, and we help in this space. So people are now understanding, okay, this isn't one monolithic thing that I have to do all at once. We can do this iteratively, and we can continue to make progress for the positive in our organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Last one we're going to cover, probably because that's all we have time for, is pay down your vulnerability debt now. Now, We talk about this also on the show around aspects of security and technical debt and the challenges with that. Why now? What allows us to start to pay this down now? Because if I think about it, it's probably gotten a little harder, right? Because we went to cloud, we went to remote workers. Like, we just took what was a pretty easy environment potentially to secure and kind of expanded it. Why now? Isn't it harder to pay down that debt?
It probably is harder to pay down that debt given the sprawl that happens with cloud. And I'm actually a big fan of things like attack surface management to help people know what it is that they have out there. But really, this was that goodwill moment where we said, this is the time, right? Everybody's still reeling a bit from Log4j in a sense that it became a critical emergency for almost every company. And to realize that you need to sit there and systematically look at the vulnerability that you have and prioritize it. Now is just the time to use that goodwill, to use the sort of concern now that IT ops may have not had before, but they have now after having gone through Log4j, to just start looking at things and everybody getting on the same page. Because where I still see a lot of conflict is between the security team and the IT ops team, the people who govern and the people who execute. To me, there's still a lot of friction there, and we're hoping that this is a time for CISOs to use that influence that we've been talking about. And the theme of this whole paper is use that influence now to make some real progress on vulnerability debt.
And it's not just IT ops, it's DevOps too, Jess. I mean,
Sure.
If you think about where we see friction, it's friction between the security teams and the DevOps teams. Some of the DevOps teams are taking on more of the infrastructure components now. So they're replacing aspects of IT ops. So we've also created more operational teams that we also have to work with and reduce friction to get and to pay down some of this debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all has to do, very much with product security as well.
Right. Yeah. Product security was mentioned on here. I think the other one, just quickly to mention, was around preparing for critical vulnerability response, right? I think, again, Log4j created a little bit of a crisis. Do we have our incident response plans in place? Can we respond quickly to events? Those are, a couple other key areas that came out of this report.
Yeah, and this again was where the government is also a source of good, because CISA put out some excellent playbooks for folks that maybe don't have the resources to do that themselves. Not only do they have an IR playbook for small to medium-sized businesses, which was heavily contributed to by the larger private sector organizations, there's also a vulnerability response playbook. And we're advocating that you really treat this like an IR team. You create that team, it's a cross-functional team, and you put it through its paces on a critical vulnerability response. And you do drills similarly to what you do, tabletops and everything else that you do for your typical IR plan and playbooks.
Yeah, agreed. Jason, Ben, any additional questions for Jess while we have her?
No, good to go from my side. I appreciate the insight and getting the information out to the masses, because you're absolutely right. We need to start using these frameworks, using these best practices that that CISA's putting out, the government's putting out, and really use it as a framework to move our businesses forward.
Ben?
Yeah, agreed. No, totally agree. I thought you're kind of right on spot with that. So I agree with a lot of the points that you brought up, and think that they're great focus areas.
Jess, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Pleasure to be here. Come back anytime.
You got it. With that, we're going to take a quick break and cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.